Welcome friends once again to the NPTEL MOOC module on international trade theory and empirics. We are at the verge of 10th week of our session. Here we have been discussing on dynamics of exchange rate in the international market, and in the last couple of lectures we have unfolded the discussion on exchange rate overshooting, role of monetary policy or role of monetary theorist or the monetary approach. Then also we address the discussion related to what is called exchange rate in the short run. Now, as I mentioned earlier that in the last lecture we talked about exchange rate overshooting. In the diagram I think I did not spend much time, but the last quadrant of the diagram where we wanted to mention that exchange rate overshooting in the short run there are huge dynamics. So, and in the long run it gets adjusted and almost stabilizes. Therefore, there are two rates in the exchange rate overshooting diagram. In this lecture we will be focusing on exchange rate in the long run, and the time is quite long, and the adjustment takes place accordingly. I think there are many interpretations where the role of prices is being discussed, and the exchange rate parity theory is also important. Now, in this context let me start the introduction of the exchange rate in the long run. What I wanted to mention here that the model of long run exchange rate behavior provides the framework that actors in asset markets use to focus future exchange rates. Okay. So, based on the behavior of a long run we can able to forecast the future exchange rates. Now, in all those contexts we can discuss the aspect those are quite important for the long run analysis. Okay. Now, so second aspect as we first of all I said that forecasting is possible, therefore, predictions about the long run movements in the exchange rates are important even in the short run as well, that we discussed earlier. In the long run an increase in the money supply or if there is a sporadic change in the money supply, that might cause a proportionate increase in the price, and hence according to the purchasing power parity a proportional depreciation of nominal exchange rate is expected. Okay. So, and whereas the real exchange rate does not change, because the real exchange rate gets adjusted with the purchasing power parity through the law of one price. Okay. An increase in the rate of growth of money supply causes a permanent increase in inflation. Okay. That is what all about the background, and some other points are also relevant, like hence based on this analysis a quicker nominal depreciation and no change in real exchange rate is expected. In the classical model money does not matter, as we already mentioned that money does not matter for real variables in the long run. The idea of a link between long run price level and long run exchange rate is useful starting point for explanation here. In the long run national price level play a important role in finding both the interest rate and the relative prices at which countries' products are traded. The theory of purchasing power parity actually explains movements in the exchange rate between two countries currencies by changes in the country's price level. So, through the PPP we will link the prices to its exchange rate. Therefore, our next slide is focused on the understanding of PPP and law of one price. The couple of slides will be explaining the same theory we have already discussed earlier. Now, what do you mean by law of one price? It says that identical goods sold in different countries must sell for the same price when prices are expressed in terms of the same currency. So, it suggests that when prices are expressed in same currency, then and given the identical goods sold in different countries, the prices has to be same. Okay. If the currency is expressed in is same, the prices are also expected to be same for the same identical goods. This law applies only in competitive markets. Okay. Some assumptions are like competitive markets or free of which is also with free transport cost, and there is no official barriers to trade. Okay. Now, what other important aspects of PPP? Purchasing power parity, which is connected to the law of one price. It suggests that the exchange rate between two countries currencies equals the ratio of countries price levels. Okay. It compares average prices across countries. Okay. So, it is the average prices, not by the individual prices. It predicts a dollar or a euro, or here we can say rupees to dollar. Here we have cited the example from Krugman of Field book, okay, and they have taken dollar and euro. I am also citing the same thing for our easy understanding. And so, the exchange rate is equal to so dollar with 4 unit of euro is equal to price in terms of dollar divided by price in terms of euro of a particular product. Okay. So, PUS is the dollar price, we have already said, and of a particular commodity basket that is sold in United States, and PE is in England or in Europe. If you are taking euro here, euro symbol is there. So, that means the country concerned for E stands for Europe. Okay. Now, what are the relations between this PPP and law of one price? The law of one price applies to individual commodities, while PPP applies to aggregate or average general price level. Okay. If the law of one price holds true for every commodity, then PPP must also automatically hold true for the same reference basket across countries. Okay. So, therefore, the proponents of this theory, purchasing power parity theory, argue that that its validity does not require the law of one price to hold exactly. Okay. Now, there are some difference between absolute PPP and relative PPP. Absolute PPP states that the exchange rate equal relative price levels, okay, which we have simply expressed the exchange rate is equal to the ratio of prices of both the countries. Whereas, the relative PPP states that the percentage change in the exchange rate between two countries over any period equals the difference between the percentage change in the national price levels. Okay. So, the percentage change in the exchange rate between two countries over any period equals the difference between the percentage changes in the national price levels. So, a relative PPP between the United States and Europe would be that so the exchange rate difference is important in period T and period T minus 1. There are two period we are referring. So, period T exchange rate of of the present period and T minus in the previous period divided by the exchange rate of the previous period. So, that the relative change in the exchange rate is discussed as simply the difference between the inflation rate. Okay. So, since we have taken price ratio, so pi stands for the inflation rate in US in period T, and pi stands for the inflation rate of inflation, which already includes the change, okay, in the present period, because it has calculated the 52 weeks change. Okay. So, this is what we call it as relative PPP. So, what are the long run connections to the PPP to the exchange rate through PPP? A real depreciation of the value of home's products means a fall in measuring power of foreign products relative to purchasing power of home products. Okay. the long run values of real exchange rate will depend on demand and supply conditions in a world where PPP does not hold. So, in any case demand and supply actually matters for the products that defines the real exchange rate. According to the real exchange rate formula, the nominal exchange rates are equal to the real exchange rate, and the home or foreign price ratio, where money does not influence the real exchange rate in the long run, which we have mentioned in the classical model. Hence, the changes in the money's influence only prices and leaving the real exchange rate unchanged and are directly transferred to the nominal exchange rate changes. So, these are the context I am presenting from Krugman's book, Krugman and Ofschild book, and it clarifies. You can refer the chapter number for long run exchange rate. So, both monetary factors and real factors influence the nominal exchange rate. How it is influencing, like it increases in money, the increases in money levels leads to increase in prices, okay, and changes in nominal and not real exchange rate. Second aspect is related to this is that increases in the money growth rate leads to persistent inflation and persistent nominal depreciation, but the real exchange rate stays constant, which we have already discussed. Second most important point is that increase in the relative demand. First we said increase in the monetary supply, monetary level, or it is monetary growth. And second important points we are connecting through relative demand of domestic products leads to real appreciation, and the increase in the relative supply of domestic products, if increases, that leads to real depreciation of the exchange rate in the long run. So, in the long run, when economic changes are influenced by the monetary factors, so nominal exchange rates are determined by purchasing power parity. Okay. So, in the long run, when economic changes are caused by factors that affect real output, exchange rates are not determined by PPP only, but are also influenced by the real exchange rate. Okay. Now, coming to the discussion of monetary approach makes a number of specific predictions about the long run effects on the exchange rate of changes in money supply, interest rate and output. So, like for the example of US, which we have cited here, that an increase in the US money supply causes a proportional long run depreciation of the dollar against the euro, isn't it? Whereas a rise in the interest rate in dollar dominated assets causes a depreciation of the dollar against the euro, or appreciation if we are taking a reverse direction of it. Similarly, in case of output growth, a rise in the US output causes a appreciation of the dollar against the euro. So, these are implications we have already mentioned. Now, some other directions to the linkages of inflation, interest rate parity and purchasing power parity suggest that money supply growth at a constant rate eventually results in ongoing inflation at the same rate. So, changes in the long run inflation rate do not affect the full employment output level or the long run relative prices of goods and services. If so full employment output is attended, then there will not be any further change. Changes in the long run inflation rate do not affect the full employment output level. Okay. The interest rate is not independent of money supply growth in the long run. All right. So, these are important directions of long run interpretations. Now, some other effects is pointed by Fisher called Fisher's effect, which states that a rise or a fall in countries countries expected inflation rate will eventually cause an equal rise or fall in the interest rate in the deposits of the currency offer, deposits of its currency offer. That means, a rise in the country's expected inflation eventually cause a rise in the interest rate that deposits of its currency offers. Okay. This is what a direct connection identified by Fisher, and therefore, we have here discussing about long run time paths of the American economic variables after a permanent increase in the growth rates of the US money. Here we are citing, like we are explaining the US money supply over time period, then its connection with interest rate over time period, then price level over time period, then the dollar euro exchange rate over time period. Now, the slope is here pi, so far as money supply is concerned, then till T0 it is positively sloped, then also it is we are mentioning pi plus delta pi, then dollar interest rate also okay, it is changing by by delta pi. Now, other details we are going to explain right now. What is important here in the first part, like this actually explains where at time period 0 the bank of the Federal Reserve Bank unexpectedly increases the growth rate of US money. Okay. So, the supply of money to a higher level, that has implications on interest rate, implications on price levels, and also implications on the dollar euro exchange rate. Here in this case the dollar interest rate rises because people expect more rapid future money supply growth, okay, and dollar depreciation. The interest rate increases, the interest rate increase is associated with higher expected inflation and an immediate currency depreciation as well, because since money supply increases with the expected inflation, it leads to depreciation of the currency, that is dollar. All right. So, now this is explained by the fourth quadrant. This figure confirms the main long run predictions of the Fisher's effect. Fisher's effect actually says the expected rise in the interest rate, expected rise in exchange rate, and the inflation rate is connected to the interest rate of that currency deposits. Okay. So, which we have just explained, and we are going to discuss some other aspects. So, through some examples pointed out by Krugman's explanation. So, inflation and interest rate in Switzerland is given, Switzerland, the United States and Italy from the period 1970 till 2000 is mentioned here. So, how interest rate and inflation, expected inflation rate in Switzerland is presented here. Okay. Now, the interest rate is in a different color than that of inflation rate. Inflation rate is in black color. Okay. Then another is in orange color. So, we can see that these go in a positive direction, whereas in case of United States this is also valid, but there are some intersectionality between these two as well over time. Similarly, for Italy we can see the changes as mentioned by Krugman in his book on international trade. Inflation and interest rates show a long run tendency to move together, as Fisher's effect suggests. So, even there are other countries and its empirical evidences can be collected. Now, in this slide I wanted to explain that the empirical support for purchasing power parity and the law of one price is weak in recent data. That is the prices of identical baskets when converted to a single currency differ substantially across countries. Then the weak relationship is identified. prices of identical goods basket when converted to a single currency differ substantially across countries, then that is a matter of concern. So, matter of weak relationship between these two. The relative PPP is sometimes a reasonable approximation to the data, but it performs very poorly. Okay. Now, there are some problems with PPP, that the failure of the empirical evidence to support the PPP and the law of one price is related to factors like trade barriers and non-tradables. If these are there, then the empirical evidence to support the PPP and law of one price get disturbed. Then another factor like departures from the free competition, if it is not there, we assumed already that the market has to follow a competitive format. Then if there occurs, third point is that if there occurs international differences in price level measurement, if the measurement is different, then this relationship does not hold. Now, as a departure from the PPP may be even greater in the short run than in the long run, and there are some examples for it, like an abrupt appreciation of the dollar against foreign currencies causes the price of farm equipment in the US to differ from that of foreigners until markets adjust to the exchange rate change. Okay, so, those problems and its explanations are given through the diagram, how the price levels and real incomes are connected as per the price level relative to US. Okay, and so countries price levels tend to rise, it is we can easily see that each dot represents a country. There are so many countries and its collections have been presented in this two dimensional figure. The straight line indicates a statistician's best predictions of a country's price level related to United States based on knowing its real per capita income. So, this of so many countries it is positively linked. Okay. So, the dollar Deutschmark exchange rate and the relative US German price levels from the period is presented here. Okay. On the vertical axis we are taking exchange rate between dollar and Deutschmark and the here in the horizontal axis we are taking different periods. The also on the vertical axis we are taking the price ratio between US and Germany, because Deutschmark is the currency of Germany. Okay, so you can easily see that the changes are clearly highlighted. This shows that relative PPT did not explain the dollar or the dollar Deutschmark exchange rate after 1970, especially 1970 onward. 1970 onwards the changes are different, it does not have a proper trend, there are the fluctuations hugely. Now, going beyond the purchasing power parity, we can also define a general model of long run exchange rates. There are two specific causes that explain why the long run values of real exchange rates can change, that is a change in world relative demand for American products. So, like an increase or fall in world relative demand for American output causes a long run real appreciation or depreciation of the dollar against the euro currency which we have discussed. Similarly, a change in the relative output and its supply lead to a long run real depreciation of the dollar against the euro. So, there are differences also in terms of nominal and real exchange rate in the long run equilibrium. Changes such as changes in the national money supplies and demand give rise to the proportional long run movements in the nominal exchange rates and international price level ratios predicted by the relative purchasing power theory. The most important determinants of long run swings in nominal exchange rates, assuming that all variables start out at their long run levels, this will certainly shift in relative money supply levels and also shift in the relative money supply growth rates, also in terms of output demand, relative output demand and output supply. Okay. When all disturbances are monetary in nature, exchange rates obey their relative purchasing power parity over a long period of time. A monetary disturbance actually affects only in general purchasing power of a currency. Okay, this change in purchasing power changes equally the currency's value in terms of domestic and foreign goods. When disturbances occur in output markets, especially not in the purchasing power purchasing power rather in the output markets, the exchange rate is unlikely to obey the relative price PPP even in also in the long run. So, this is quite important to note so far as quiz questions are concerned. Now, coming to the relationship, I think there are different relationship between money market and its money market or output market, which we have contained in the presentation so far. That in the money market, the effects in the long run nominal or dollar exchange rate. Okay. If there is an increase in money supply level, so far as money market is concerned, there will be a proportional increase in the exchange rate, okay, over the long run. If increase in European money supply is there, then there will be a proportional decrease for sure. Okay. Whereas in the US money supply growth rate increases, US money supply growth rate increases, of course, this will again increase the nominal exchange rate, that means depreciating the dollar value. Similarly, increase in the European money supply growth rate, it will appreciate the dollar against the euro. Okay. So, coming to the output market, when there is increase in demand for US output, obviously then there will be a nominal appreciation of the dollar, that is or decrease in the exchange rate. Increase in demand for European goods, then the reverse will reverse is true. Similarly, output supply increases in United States and output supply in Europe accordingly, but in this case, as we have already said, when output supply increases in United States, we cannot guarantee the implications in the long run of its exchange rate, because there might not be enough demand for it. If supply is there, we cannot able to correctly gauge. This is very important to note, and whatever we presented so far is actually summarizing here in this particular table. Going beyond the purchasing power parity as a general model of long run exchange rate, we are presenting an example from 1950 to 2000 as per the estimation by Krugman and Ostfeld using the Penwald table, that there are fluctuations of real exchange rate, dollar against yen. Okay. Then the US dollar has steadily depreciated in real terms against Japan. Okay. Then because it is steadily the value is rising, that means against yen the value of dollar is depreciating. The straight line indicates the average trend growth over time in the real exchange rate. Alright, this I think this is taken from Quarterly Journal Economics mentioned in the Krugman's book. Similarly, looking at the sectoral productivity and growth differences, the change in relative price of non-traded goods from 1970 to 1985, different countries and the changes are mentioned here. Higher traded and non-traded productivity growth difference is associated with a higher rate of increase in the relative price of non-tradable goods. Okay. So, I think to note that in terms of international interest rate differences and the real exchange rate, that in general interest rate differences between countries depend not only on differences in expected inflation, but also on expected change in the real exchange rate. Only expected inflation is not the factor, rather real change in the exchange rate also matters. So, relationship between expected change in the real exchange rate, the expected change in the nominal rate and expected inflation can be presented like this. So, expected exchange rate, real exchange rate minus its change over the real exchange rate is presented right hand side, that the nominal exchange rate expected and it is changes over time minus the change in the inflation rate. If we can subtract the or neutralize the inflationary changes from the nominal exchange rate, then the real exchange rate is calculated. So, the change in the real exchange rate is actually calculated as the change in the nominal exchange rate minus change in the inflation rate. Okay. So, to sum up our discussion, so this has to be noted very clearly. Left hand side is basically the change in the real exchange rate, and right hand side is the explanation for real exchange rate through nominal exchange rate as well as through expected change in the inflation rate. Okay. All right. Now, okay. So, to sum it off of all our discussion so far, absolute PPP states that the purchasing power of any currency is the same in any country and implies relative purchasing power parity. Okay. So, and the second one, the relative purchasing power parity predicts the percentage change in exchange rates, equal differences in national inflation rates. Okay. The law of one price is a building block of the purchasing power parity theory. This states that under free competition and in the absence of trade impediments, a good must sell for a single price regardless of where in the world it is sold. Okay. The monetary approach to the exchange rate uses purchasing power parity to explain the long term exchange rate behavior exclusively in terms of money supply and demand. The Fisher's effect, which has connected the international differences with the ongoing inflation rate. Okay. Now, and that has been also validated through different examples. Now, coming to the explanation and the support through the empirical findings from different sources as mentioned in the Krugman and Ausubel book, that PPP and the law of one price is weak in some of the recent data. The failure of these propositions in the real world is actually related to the trade barriers or if free market or the competitive market is not followed, and there are differences in the price levels and their measurement, unit of measurement is different, then of course it has other implications, and the relationship between PPP and law of one price does not hold, or if it holds, it is the relationship is quite weak. Okay. So, the deviations from the relative purchasing power parity can be actually understood as changes in a country's real exchange rate. All right. A stepwise increase in a country's money stocks leads to a proportional rise in the price level and a proportional fall in its country's foreign exchange value. The real interest parity condition also equates international differences in nominal interest rate to the expected percentage change in the nominal exchange rate. Okay. So, basically we have discussed about 6 points connecting to the relationship between PPP and law of one price. We discussed about its connection with the expected inflation rate, we discussed about Fisher's effect. Also, we have tried our best to understood the interest parity condition to its connection with the real exchange rate changes in the long run. So, these are all for this class, and we will expect your participation in the next class on trilemma, exchange rate trilemma with capital mobility. Okay. So, welcome you to the next class. Thank you.